Good morning, middle school. It's Thursday, April 16th. And gosh, I still miss you guys. Wish you were here. It's not what we would want, but we're going to make it as good as we can. So we're in Exodus chapter 16. Great story we're going to do today. And I have a really good assignment for you too. Let me start with a story. This was, I don't know how many years ago, 5 years ago or so. And I might have told you this story, but I was stopping at Panera to get lunch for Karen and I. It was, I think it's Saturday. It's kind of a rainy day, kind of like the weather's been here. And got us each a sandwich, and I got one of their toffee chip cookies, which I love those cookies. Drove home, we ate our lunch. I went to get my cookie out of the bag, and it wasn't there. Oh my gosh, now I gotta drive all the way back there. But I thought, you know what? That's okay, because a lot of times when a company makes a mistake like that or something, that they will give you an extra one just for your trouble. So I thought, wow, I'll get 2 cookies out of this. So go back to Panera, and Karen said, hey, after you go there, would you stop and get us some milk? We need some milk at Giant Eagle. I said, no problem. So I go into Panera, bring out my receipt. I say, hey, I got lunch here, took it home. My wife and I had lunch, and the cookie that was supposed to be in the bag wasn't there. And so I came back to get my cookie. I'm thinking, this is awesome, I'm gonna get 2 cookies. A lady turned around, put a cookie in the bag, handed it to me, said next. I was done. So I'm in Giant Eagle, and I'm thinking to myself, God, I can't believe that I had to go home, I had to come back, all for a cookie. She didn't try to make it right a little bit. So as I'm going through Giant Eagle, I'm kind of thinking to myself, you know what, I might shoot an email off to district manager or something like that, and just let them know, hey, this is a big inconvenience, and they didn't try to make it right or make up for it. So I'm composing this email, and I get to Giant Eagle, finish up, get in the car, go home, and when I'm unloading the groceries, I realize, oh my gosh, I left my cookie in the grocery cart. Well, I wasn't going to go back and get it. So I told that story to our church staff, and Danielle Rare was there. Danny, you know Mrs. Rare. As I'm telling the story, afterwards she says, what I find most interesting about this story is you wouldn't let the person at the counter at Panera make a simple mistake. That you just assumed they should do something nice for you because of the inconvenience, and you just couldn't let them make a mistake. And she was right. It kind of leads into our story today, because what we're going to see in God's people is a complaining spirit that just kind of pops out of nowhere. Okay, before we get to that though, a couple facts to start with. Fact number 1, as the story starts, the people are no longer slaves. They're about a month in to their freedom. It's about 30 days. Give or take a day, in which they've been free after hundreds of years of slavery. After praying that God would deliver them, he sent a deliverer in Moses, and Moses set the people free. In fact, when they left Egypt, the Egyptians were so glad to see them go, they gave them gold and silver and pots and pans and everything that they would need to build a life for themselves. And so a month later, the Israelites are basking in the glow of that freedom. It's fact number 1. Fact number 2 is that they've been free, as I said, for about a month. So the story we're going to see today takes place about 30 days after they're completely set free from their slavery. Now I'm going to read the beginning of the story. Next is chapter 16. The whole Israelite community set out from Elim and came to the desert of Zin, which is between Elim and Sinai, on the 15th day of the 2nd month after they came out of Egypt. In the desert, the whole community grumbled against Moses and Aaron. The Israelites said to them, if only we had died by the Lord's hand in Egypt. There we sat around pots of meat and ate all the food we wanted. But you have brought us out here into the desert to starve this entire assembly to death. So the Israelites get out 30 days away from Egypt. They're enjoying their freedom, and now they're complaining about the menu. They don't like the food that God is giving them. 3 things I want to notice here about their complaining. When it says in the desert, the whole community said, if only we had stayed in Egypt. The first thing is complainers, okay, the Israelites or complainers in general, live in an if-only world. If only we had stayed behind. If only I went to a different school. If only I didn't have my brothers and sisters bothering me all the time. If only I had a better phone. If only my friends were nicer to me. Complainers live in an if-only world. If things were different, if only this would happen, I'd be happy. I'd be at peace. I'd be okay. I wouldn't be complaining. I'm complaining because things aren't the way they should be. If only things were better, I wouldn't be complaining like this. They live in an if-only world. Okay, second thing. They said, there in Egypt, we sat around pots of meat and ate all the food we wanted. Complainers loved to distort. Now, when they were slaves in Egypt, you know as well as I do, that they didn't have all the food that they wanted, and they certainly weren't sitting around pots of meat and enjoying lavish dinners. That's not what slaves experience. Slaves are given the minimum amount of food to keep them alive in order to do the work that the owners of the slaves want them to do. There's no lavishness about it. There's no luxuriousness about it. There's certainly no abundance about it. But the complainers distort. They always think of the past and make it better than it really was. They imagine the past to be different, and in doing that, they distort it. We remember how we had feasts and we sat around and ate meat and had all the food we could want. They distort what the past was like. Third thing, but they said, you have brought us out into this desert to starve this entire assembly to death. Complainers exaggerate. Now, the Israelites have been gone, what we say, a month. And the Israelites are saying, you brought us out here into this desert to starve us to death. So they've been gone a month. Nobody has starved. But they exaggerate things, and they think the only thing that can happen to them is they would starve to death. They're exaggerating their situation. They're blowing things out of proportion. They're making things much bigger than they really were. So that's what we see, the spirit of complaining in the Israelites. Now, keep reading the story. The Lord said to Moses, I will rain down bread from heaven for you. The people are to go out each day and gather enough for that day. In this way I will test them to see if they will follow my instructions. On the 6th day, they are to prepare what they bring in, and that is to be twice as much as they gather on the other days. So God wants them to rest on the 7th day. So he says, I'm going to bring you bread every single day, enough for everybody for that day. But on day 6 of the week, tell them to gather twice as much, so they'll have enough for day 6, enough for day 7, which is going to be a day of rest. So Moses and his brother Aaron tell this to the Israelites, and they say this, God has heard your complaining against him. 4 times in the story, it says that God heard their complaining. 4 times, God heard their complaining. Verse 13. That evening, quail is a small bird and it has kind of a chicken taste. That evening, quail came and covered the camp. And in the morning, there was a layer of dew all around the camp. When the dew was gone, thin flakes like frost on the ground appeared on the desert floor. When the Israelites saw it, they said to each other, what is this? For they didn't know what it was. Moses said to them, it's the bread the Lord has given you to eat. That is why the Lord commanded everyone to gather as much as they need and take an omer for each person as you have in your tent. An omer was a unit of measurement. I think it was about 2 pounds or so for it. And it says later in the story that this bread, this frost that was covering the ground in the mornings, and when it burned off, underneath the frost was this flaky substance that they called manna, M-A-N-N-A. And it says in the Bible it was like a wafer that had a hint or flavor of honey. Something that would be really good to eat. So the last point here, in light of all these complaints from the people, they're living in an if-only world. They're distorting what the past was like. They're exaggerating their situation. God was gracious to them anyway. He hears their complaining. He brings quail down into the camp for them to kill. He showers the camp with a wafer kind of materials, little like a cracker, tasted like honey. So God is gracious to them despite their complaining. They're a month away. God has set them free. He wants to take them to a land in which he's going to cause them to flourish. And yet, 30 days out, all they can do is complain about the food, and God was gracious to them anyway. Now, here's your assignment, and I'm going to put it on your classroom board where you can see it online, because I want you to take the assignment and read it, the assignment, word for word to your parents. Now let me tell you what the assignment is. Where to put it? Here it is. This is what I want you to read to your parents. Today, Pastor Chip taught about the Israelites and their freedom from slavery. But after a month, the Israelites complained that their food was far worse than the food they ate as slaves. My assignment is to ask you 2 questions. So you're reading this to your parents, your mom, your dad, or both. My assignment is to ask you 2 questions. First, is there something that I complain about? So you're to ask your mom or your dad or both. Just let them answer it. You ask them, is there something I complain about? And just be quiet and let them speak. Okay. When they're done, then you go on to question 2. The second question is, what is something that you complain about? So you're going to ask your mom and dad to share something that they struggle with in complaining. And that way that you'll have this kind of back and forth with your parents of realizing, you know what? We're kind of alike. The things we complain about might be different, but there are times when we do complain. And then have a prayer time with your parents in which you acknowledge that God is gracious even though we complain. So there you are, Thursday, April 16th, the story of Exodus chapter 16. And I'll put the assignment on the class board or class work page, and then there'll be a way for you to respond if you did the assignment or not. So Thursday, April 16th, I'm out.